Victor had always been a dreamer. In the quiet, peaceful village of Saratov, Russia, he spent most of his days working hard, trying to carve out a life for himself. He wasn't the most wealthy or powerful man in the village, but he had a strong will and a kind heart. His dreams, though, were as big as the mountains surrounding his home. He wanted nothing more than to find someone to share his life with, someone who would love him for who he truly was, not just for what he could provide or his abilities. It was a dream that seemed distant, almost impossible at times. For many years, Victor worked diligently in his small town, doing what he could to make a living. He wasn't exactly a skilled farmer like many of the other men in the village, who worked the fields day in and day out. But Victor was clever in other ways. He had a talent for fixing things, tools, shoes, small household items, and he was good at it. Though his income was modest, it was enough to cover the basics, and he was content with that. Yet there was always a longing inside of him, a desire for something more. He had always imagined himself married with children, surrounded by a loving family. But there was one thing that had always seemed to stand in his way: his disability. Years ago, Victor had suffered a serious injury while working on a farm, an accident that left him with a limp. The pain was constant, but more than the physical ache, it was the shame he sometimes felt. In a community that valued physical strength above all else, Victor often felt as though he was different, too weak, too fragile to live up to the ideal of what a man should be. Victor had never been one to feel sorry for himself. He had always tried to live with dignity, even if that meant keeping his loneliness hidden behind a strong face. But when it came to love, he couldn't help but wonder, who would ever accept him? Who would want to marry a man who was different from the others, who couldn't do the same things they could? One day, after another lonely evening spent at his small home, Victor came across an advertisement. It was a simple notice written in bold letters offering a service for men like him: mail-order brides. The concept was simple. Single men could connect with women from other parts of the country, or even other countries who were also looking for a partner. Victor's heart skipped a beat as he read the ad. This was his chance. Victor, filled with a mix of hope and excitement, decided to give it a try. He wasn't sure how it would work, but he knew he had to try. Maybe, just maybe, there was someone out there who would see beyond his disability and appreciate him for who he was. It wasn't an easy decision, but Victor filled out the forms, attached a photograph of himself, and wrote a heartfelt letter. He described his life, his hopes, his dreams, and most of all, he was honest about his injury. He didn't want to deceive anyone, and he didn't want to be rejected for something he couldn't control. He hoped that his sincerity would be enough. Weeks went by, and Victor began to feel a sense of anxiety. He had no idea what kind of responses he would get. He wasn't a wealthy man, and he knew that many women would be looking for someone with a stable income and a strong physique. Would anyone even be interested in him? Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Victor received a letter in response to his. His hands trembled as he opened it, hoping to see words of kindness and perhaps the beginning of a new chapter in his life. But as he read the letter, his heart sank. The woman who had initially shown interest in him had decided that she couldn't marry him. The reason was clear. She had read about his injury and, though polite, she wrote that she couldn't accept someone with his condition. She wished him well, but made it clear that she didn't think they would be a good match. The words stung, and Victor couldn't help but feel as though his worst fear had come true. The rejection was painful, but it wasn't the first time Victor had experienced disappointment. In his earlier years, he had faced similar situations. Women he admired had turned away not out of cruelty, but because they wanted someone who could provide a certain life, someone strong and capable, someone who could work the land and build a future from the ground up. Victor had never been that man. He had always been different, yet this time the rejection felt heavier. It was as if his dreams of finding love had been dashed in a single cold letter. He stood by the window of his small home, staring out at the barren landscape, feeling a deep sense of loneliness that seemed to surround him. His hopes had been shattered, and the weight of the world seemed to press down on him. He knew that his disability would always be a part of him, but he had hoped it wouldn't be the reason he couldn't find happiness. For days, Victor struggled with the feeling of failure. He continued with his work, but his mind was clouded by the rejection. How could he ever overcome this? How could he ever hope to find someone who would accept him just as he was? The questions swirled in his mind, and each answer seemed to push him deeper into despair. But Victor, despite everything, was not one to give up so easily. He had faced hardship before and had always found a way to keep going. He was determined not to let this rejection define him. He would continue living his life, doing what he could, and he would find a way to move forward, even if it seemed impossible. In the days that followed, Victor did his best to focus on his work, but the weight of his disappointment continued to hang over him. The dreams of a future with a partner, a family, seemed farther away than ever. He had never felt so isolated, so out of place. He knew that people in his village spoke behind his back, quietly judging him for his disability. They would never fully understand the struggle he faced, the inner battle between his desire to live a full life and the limitations that came with his injury. As time passed, Victor tried to keep his head high, but it wasn't easy. He found himself withdrawing from the world even more, avoiding social gatherings and keeping to himself. He thought about writing another letter, but the thought of facing more rejection was unbearable. Instead, he chose to retreat into his work, hoping that over time the hurt would fade. But little did Victor know, this rejection was not the end of his story. It was, in fact, just the beginning of a chapter that would change his life in ways he never could have imagined. And the person who would help him turn the page was someone he would never have expected, a kind and wise woman whose life had been shaped by hard work and perseverance, someone who would see in Victor not his disability but the strength of his spirit. After receiving the letter from the woman he had hoped would be his future, Victor found himself in a whirlwind of emotions. The rejection hit him harder than he had expected. The pain of the letter was not just in the words themselves, but in the feeling of being invisible, of being unworthy of love. It felt as though the door to his dreams had been slammed shut, and he was left standing in the cold with no way forward. For the first few days after the rejection, Victor barely left his home. He spent long hours sitting by the window, gazing out at the quiet village of Saratov. The seasons were changing, the trees turning from green to gold, but Victor saw none of it. He felt as though he were frozen in time. The life he had hoped for seemed so far away, out of reach. In his heart there was a deep emptiness, a longing for something he couldn't have. Despite the despair he felt, Victor tried to keep up with his work. He spent his days repairing shoes, fixing tools, and doing odd jobs for the people in the village. But each task seemed to carry an added weight, as if he were moving through the motions just to pass the time. His mind often wandered, thinking about what could have been, and wondering why things had turned out the way they had. Though he was good at his work, there was always a nagging feeling that he wasn't living up to his potential. The other men in the village, with their strong arms and sturdy backs, were able to do the hard physical labor that made them valuable. They worked the fields, tended the animals, and built homes with their hands. Victor, on the other hand, was limited. His injury had taken away so much from him: his strength, his ability to work the land, his sense of independence. He had tried to push past this, to accept his limitations, but the truth was, it was hard. It was hard to feel as though he was less than others, especially when he knew that his disability would always be a part of him. He had hoped that a woman, someone who would truly understand him, would see beyond that and love him for who he was. But now, after the rejection, Victor found himself questioning everything. The people in the village were kind, but Victor could feel their eyes on him, watching him as he moved through the town. He knew that they talked about him behind his back. They whispered that he wasn't strong enough, that he couldn't provide a good life for a woman. The worst part was Victor didn't know if they were wrong. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were right, that he wasn't enough. His friends tried to comfort him, but their words never seemed to help. They told him to keep going, to keep working hard, and that eventually things would get better. But how could they understand? They had families, wives, children. They had lives filled with laughter and love. Victor's life, on the other hand, felt like a quiet, lonely road that he was walking all by himself. There were nights when he would lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if he would ever feel truly happy. Would he ever find someone who would see him for who he was and not just his disability? He longed for companionship, for someone to share his hopes and dreams with. But it seemed like that dream was slipping farther and farther away. One day, Victor decided to go for a walk through the village. He needed to clear his mind, to breathe in the fresh air and get away from the walls of his home. He walked aimlessly through the streets, passing the familiar faces of the villagers as they went about their daily business. Some greeted him with a friendly nod, others simply ignored him. Victor didn't mind either way. He wasn't looking for attention. He just wanted to escape from the thoughts that kept swirling in his head. As he walked through the market square, he noticed a small crowd gathered near the riverbank. He wasn't sure what was going on, but curiosity led him to approach. As he drew closer, he saw a figure in the middle of the crowd, an elderly woman hunched over, washing clothes in the river. Victor stopped in his tracks. The woman was old, her hair gray and tangled, her hands weathered by years of hard labor. She seemed to be working alone, her eyes focused on the clothes she was scrubbing in the water. But there was something about her, something that drew Victor's attention. Her movements were deliberate and steady despite her age. She didn't look as if she was struggling. Instead, she seemed to be in control, as if she had done this work for a lifetime. Victor watched her for a few moments before he realized that she was having trouble lifting a large bundle of wet laundry. She struggled, her body trembling with the effort. Without thinking, Victor walked over to her. "Let me help you with that," he said, offering a hand. The woman looked up, her eyes sharp despite her age. She didn't speak immediately but nodded, grateful for the help. Victor carefully lifted the bundle of clothes and handed it to her. As they worked together in silence, Victor couldn't help but notice the strength in the woman's eyes. Despite her frailty, there was something resilient about her, something that Victor could relate to. After they finished moving the laundry, the woman spoke. "Thank you, young man," she said in a raspy voice. "I'm Maria, and I've been washing clothes here for many years. You're not from around here, are you?" Victor nodded. "No, I live just down the road. I saw you struggling and thought I could lend a hand." Maria smiled, her face wrinkling with the effort. "Kindness is rare these days," she said. "But don't think I'm the type to let anyone feel sorry for me. I've lived through my fair share of struggles." Victor was taken aback by her words. He had expected her to thank him for his help, but instead she seemed to be saying that she didn't need help. She had survived without it for so long. "I wasn't trying to pity you," Victor said softly. I don't like seeing anyone struggle alone." Maria chuckled, a sound that was deep and warm. "Well, you're not alone either, are you? It looks like you've got your own battles to face." Victor hesitated, unsure of how to respond. It was true. His heart was heavy with the pain of rejection, and his mind was clouded by doubts about his worth. But he wasn't ready to share that with her, not yet. Instead, he just nodded, appreciating the conversation. Maria seemed to sense his unease. "I see," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "But remember, it's not always about what you can do with your hands. It's about what's in here." She tapped her chest, her eyes meeting his with an intensity that surprised him. Victor felt something stir inside him. There was something about Maria's words, something that gave him a flicker of hope. He had been so focused on what he couldn't do, on what he was missing, that he had forgotten about the strength within him, the strength that didn't come from his legs or his hands but from his heart. "I'll see you around." "Young man," Maria said, smiling again. Victor watched her walk away, a small fire igniting inside him. Maria didn't see his disability. She saw something else in him, something more important, and for the first time in a long while, Victor felt like maybe, just maybe, there was hope for him yet. Over the next few days, Victor found himself thinking about Maria more and more. Her words, so simple yet so powerful, echoed in his mind. It was as if she had given him a glimpse of something he had long forgotten. Hope. Victor had always been a man who carried his burdens quietly, not wanting to trouble anyone with his pain. But Maria had seen through that. She hadn't seen him as just a man with a limp, but as someone with strength, a strength he had started to doubt he still had. Victor continued to go about his daily life, fixing shoes, repairing tools, and doing odd jobs around the village, but something had shifted within him. He no longer saw his disability as an obstacle to his happiness. Instead, he started to believe that maybe, just maybe, he could find a way to live a full life despite it. The small interactions with the villagers began to feel less like a burden and more like a chance to show that he had value. It was a slow process, but Victor began to feel lighter. The weight of his earlier rejection seemed to lift little by little. Though he had not yet spoken to anyone about the hurt he carried from the rejection, He knew deep down that he had to move past it. Maria's words kept him grounded. It's not always about what you can do with your hands. It's about what's in here. She had pointed to his heart when she said that. Victor now tried to hold on to that truth whenever he felt doubt creeping in. One afternoon, as Victor was fixing a shoe for an elderly neighbor, he saw Maria walking toward him. She was carrying a basket of clothes, the familiar weight of her laundry bundle on her back. She waved to him as she approached, and Victor couldn't help but smile. There was something comforting about her presence, something steady and calm, as if she had lived 1,000 lives but had learned to find peace in the simple things. "Good afternoon, Victor," Maria said as she reached him. Her voice was warm as it always was, but there was something more today. Perhaps it was the way she looked at him, a look that seemed to carry more meaning than before. It made Victor feel seen, truly seen. "Afternoon, Maria," Victor replied, standing up from his workbench. "How are you today?" "Oh, the same as always," Maria said with a twinkle in her eye. "Still washing clothes by the river, still getting my hands dirty." She chuckled, shaking her head. "But today I wanted to ask you something." Victor raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" "I was wondering if you'd come with me tomorrow," she said. "I've been thinking about you, Victor. You've been helping me when you can, and I've noticed something in you that I think is worth seeing more of. I'd like you to come to the village square tomorrow afternoon. There's a small gathering there, and I think you'd be a good person to talk to the others." Victor blinked in surprise. "Me talk to them?" Maria nodded. "Yes, I believe you have a lot to offer, Victor. It's easy to forget that sometimes, especially when life gets tough. But I see you, and I think others will too. They need to see that there's more to you than just your injury." Victor felt his heart race. He had never been one to put himself in the spotlight, let alone speak to a crowd. The idea of talking to a group of people made him anxious. What could he possibly say that would matter? He wasn't a scholar, he wasn't a great speaker, and he wasn't exactly known for being a leader. But there was something about Maria's belief in him that made him want to try. "I don't know if I'm the right person, Maria," Victor said hesitantly. "I'm not really good at speaking in front of others, and, well, I've always been the quiet one, Maria smiled gently, her eyes softening. "I know, Victor, but sometimes the quiet ones have the most to say. People don't always need grand speeches. They need honesty, and they need to feel like they're not alone in their struggles. You've been through a lot, and I think you could inspire others who feel like they don't have a place in this world." Victor swallowed hard. Her words resonated with him in a way he couldn't fully explain. He had never thought of himself as an inspiration. He had always just tried to survive, to get through each day without drawing too much attention to himself. But now Maria was asking him to do something more, to share his story, to show others that even in the face of hardship there could be hope. "I'll do it," Victor said, surprising himself. He didn't fully understand why he had agreed. But something inside him urged him to take that step, to stop hiding behind his fear and uncertainty. The next day, Victor met Maria at the village square where a small crowd was already gathered. People were talking, laughing, and exchanging goods. But when Maria appeared with Victor at her side, there was a noticeable shift in the atmosphere. Victor's heart pounded in his chest as they made their way to the center of the square. Maria turned to him. "Don't be nervous, Victor. Just speak from your heart. That's all they need to hear." Victor nodded, though his hands were trembling. He had never done something like this before. His thoughts were scattered and his mind raced with doubt. What would they think of him? Would they laugh at him? Would they see him as weak, just like he had felt all these years? As Maria introduced him to the group, Victor felt his knees go weak. He could feel all their eyes on him, curious, expectant, waiting. He took a deep breath and opened his mouth. "Hello," Victor began, his voice quiet at first. He wasn't sure if anyone could hear him. "My name is Victor, and I live in this village." His voice grew a little steadier as he spoke. "I've lived here for many years, and I've always tried to do my best. But I've struggled. I've always had this feeling that I'm different from the others. I'm not strong, like the men who work the fields. I've had an injury that makes it hard for me to do the things others can." He paused for a moment, looking around at the faces in the crowd. Most of them were older, familiar faces, but there were a few younger ones as well, and he could see that they were listening. "I guess I've spent a lot of my life thinking that I wasn't enough," Victor continued, "that because I couldn't do the things others could, I didn't deserve happiness. I didn't deserve love, his voice wavered, but he pressed on. But I've learned something. I've learned that it's not about how much you can carry or how hard you can work. It's about your heart, your kindness, and how you treat others. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough. There was a long silence after Victor finished speaking. He couldn't tell if anyone was moved or if they thought he was foolish. But then slowly someone in the crowd began to clap. Then another person, and another. Soon the whole crowd was clapping, and Victor felt a warm rush of gratitude flood through him. It wasn't a loud cheer, but it was enough. It was the first time he had ever felt truly seen and accepted by others. Maria gave him a proud smile, and Victor realized that in that moment, he had taken the first step toward finding the life he had always dreamed of. The journey ahead would still be difficult, but Victor was no longer alone. He had the strength of his heart to guide him. This version expands on Victor's growing self-confidence and the beginning of his change in perspective. I hope it helps to engage the audience and keep the story moving forward. Let me know if you'd like further adjustments or would like to continue with the next part. The day after Victor had spoken in the village square, he woke up with a strange feeling in his chest. It was a mixture of nervousness and excitement, something he hadn't felt in a long time. The speech he had given had stirred something inside him. He hadn't expected it to go so well, and now he was filled with the realization that people in his village saw him differently. They had listened to him, really listened, and for the first time he felt like he had something of value to offer. It wasn't just about his ability to fix shoes or tools. It was about his heart, his experiences, and his willingness to be open, to share his truth. Maria had been right all along. She had seen something in him that he hadn't even recognized in himself. She had given him the courage to stand up, to speak out, and now, Victor found himself thinking about what more he could do. Could he continue helping others? Could he use his experiences to make a difference in his community? These thoughts began to swirl in his mind as he went about his usual routine. Over the next few weeks, Victor made a point to visit the village square more often. He started helping out at the market, offering to carry heavy baskets for the older women, fixing broken carts, and offering his services to anyone who needed them. Every time he helped someone, he felt a little bit more like himself. He wasn't just the man with the limp anymore. He wasn't the man who was too weak to do what others could do. He was Victor, a person who could contribute in his own way, no matter his limitations. The villagers began to notice the change in him. They saw that he was no longer hiding from them. He wasn't ashamed of his injury or the fact that he couldn't work the fields like the other men. Instead, he embraced what he had to offer, and in doing so, he began to earn their respect. Little by little, the whispers that once followed him around faded. People started seeking his help, not just because they needed something fixed, but because they liked him. They respected him. One afternoon, as Victor was finishing up a job for an elderly woman in the village, Maria approached him. She had a warm smile on her face, and her eyes sparkled with pride. "I've been hearing good things about you, Victor," Maria said, her voice full of encouragement. "You've really made a difference here. People are starting to see you for who you truly are." Victor smiled back, his heart swelling with gratitude. "I don't know about that, Maria. I'm just doing what I can." Maria shook her head. "You're doing more than you know. You're showing them that it's not about being perfect. It's about being kind, being real, and giving what you can. And that's what they're seeing. You're inspiring them." Victor felt a lump in his throat. He had never thought of himself as an inspiration. He had always felt like he was too ordinary, too flawed. But now it seemed like he was having an impact. The realization was humbling, and for a moment he didn't know what to say. "I'm just doing what feels right," Victor said quietly. "I don't know if I'm inspiring anyone, but I'm happy. I feel like I'm finally part of something." Maria's eyes softened. "That's all anyone can hope for, Victor. To feel like they belong, to feel like they matter." Victor nodded, his heart full. He had spent so many years hiding from the world, afraid of what others might think of him. But now, with Maria's help, he had found the courage to step forward. He had stopped focusing on his limitations and started embracing his strengths. He had discovered that he didn't need to be like everyone else to be valued. He just needed to be himself. As the weeks went by, Victor continued to grow more comfortable in his own skin. He started to feel a sense of pride in the work he was doing, not just because it was useful to others, but because it gave him a sense of purpose. He found that helping others was the key to his own happiness. The more he gave, the more he received in return. One day, while Victor was working on a broken cart near the village square, he noticed a young woman watching him from across the street. She was standing outside a small shop, her eyes focused on him. Victor had seen her around the village before, but they had never spoken. She was new to the area, having recently moved to Saratov with her family. Her name was Anya, and she had come to town to help her parents run their small shop. At first, Victor wasn't sure if she was staring at him or just lost in thought. But then, as he looked up, he caught her gaze. She smiled shyly, and Victor's heart skipped a beat. He hadn't felt this way in a long time, nervous and unsure. But there was something in Anya's smile that made him feel seen, in a way that was different from the way others had seen him. He didn't know what to do. Should he wave? Should he speak to her? He was used to being invisible, to not being noticed by women in the way that others were. But now, for the first time in a long while, he wondered if someone might look beyond his injury and see the man he was becoming. He gathered his courage and walked over to where Anya stood. As he approached, she looked up at him, her face softening into a warm smile. "Hello," Victor said, his voice a little unsure. "I'm Victor." Anya's eyes brightened. "Hello, Victor. I've seen you around the village. You're the one who fixes things, right?" Victor nodded, a little embarrassed. "That's me. I try to help when I can." Anya's smile grew wider. "I've heard a lot of good things about you. People say you're always willing to lend a hand." Victor felt a blush creep up his neck. "I just do what I can. Nothing special." "I think it's special," Anya said. "I've seen you helping people, and I admire that. It's not easy to do what you do, especially when people don't always understand." Victor was taken aback by her words. You think I'm special?" Anya laughed softly, her eyes sparkling. "I think everyone has something special about them, Victor. You just have to be open to seeing it in yourself." Victor didn't know how to respond to that. He had spent so much time doubting himself, but now, here was someone who saw him in a way he hadn't seen himself in years. For the first time in a long while, Victor felt a sense of hope rise within him. Maybe he wasn't so invisible after all. Maybe there were people out there who could see past his disability and appreciate the person he truly was. As they continued to talk, Victor felt a sense of warmth spreading through him. Anya wasn't looking at him with pity. She wasn't judging him for his injury. Instead, she was treating him like anyone else, as if he was just Victor, a man who had something to offer the world. It was a feeling Victor hadn't experienced in years, and it filled him with a quiet sense of pride. That day, as Victor walked home, he couldn't help but smile to himself. He had come a long way from the man who had been too afraid to even dream of love or acceptance. And now, with Anya's words in his heart, Victor was beginning to believe that the life he had always dreamed of, one filled with love, companionship, and respect, was closer than he had ever imagined. As Victor continued to spend time in the village, something began to shift within him. The days of doubt and self-rejection that had once consumed him seemed like a distant memory. Each day, as he worked alongside the villagers, helping wherever he could, he noticed the way people started to look at him differently. They saw him for who he truly was, a man with value, not because of what he could do with his hands, but because of the heart he put into everything he did. Over time, the whispers that used to follow Victor around the village grew softer. It was no longer about his limp or his inability to work the fields like the others. Instead, the villagers saw his kindness, his hard work, and his willingness to help those in need. Victor had stopped hiding in the shadows, afraid of being judged, and in doing so, he had found his place in the community. But it wasn't just the villagers' opinion that had changed, it was Victor himself. He had learned to believe in his own worth, not because of how much he could produce or how strong he was, but because of the goodness within him. Still, there was one thing Victor couldn't shake, a lingering uncertainty. He had built up his life again, piece by piece, but something was missing. He had never forgotten his dream of finding a partner to share his life with. He had seen couples in the village, men and women who laughed together, supported each other, and built families side by side. Victor longed for that connection, that deep bond that could make life feel whole. But after the rejection from the mail-order bride service, he still wasn't sure if anyone would truly accept him. It was a question that hovered in his mind each day, though he tried not to let it consume him. He didn't need to rush. He knew that love couldn't be forced. Yet with every passing day, the longing for companionship grew stronger. He wanted someone to share his dreams with, someone who would understand him not despite his disability, but because of it. One evening, as Victor sat on the porch of his modest home, enjoying the calm of the sunset, he heard a familiar voice. It was Maria, walking toward him with her usual steady pace. Her hands were rough from years of hard work, but her smile was always kind, her eyes always filled with warmth. As she approached, Victor stood up, offering a respectful nod. "Good evening, Victor." Maria greeted him, her voice carrying the comfort of familiarity. "How are you tonight?" "I'm well, Maria," Victor replied with a smile. "Just enjoying the quiet." "It's nice to have a moment of peace." Maria smiled back, her eyes twinkling. "I can imagine. But I came to talk to you about something important." Victor raised an eyebrow, curiosity piqued. "What is it?" Maria paused, choosing her words carefully. "I've been watching you, Victor. I've seen the way you've started to change. You've found a way to let go of your fears, and you've allowed yourself to be seen for who you are. And I think it's time for you to open your heart fully. There's someone in this village who has been watching you, too." Victor's heart skipped a beat. "Who?" Maria's smile softened. "Anya." The name hit Victor like a wave. Anya, the young woman he had met a few weeks ago. The one who had treated him with such kindness and respect. The woman whose smile had made his heart race. Victor hadn't expected this. He had admired her from afar, but he hadn't allowed himself to believe that she could feel the same way about him. After all, he was still the man with a limp, the one who was often overlooked, the one who didn't fit the typical image of strength that so many people valued. "She's been talking to me about you," Maria continued, her eyes gentle but knowing. "She's seen the good in you, Victor. She respects you, not because of what you can do, but because of who you are. I think it's time you stop holding yourself back. It's time to let yourself be happy." Victor was stunned. He couldn't speak at first, his mind racing. Anya, was it possible? Could someone like her truly see him as more than just his injury? More than just the quiet man who had always hidden in the background? He had never allowed himself to dream that someone like her would be interested in him. But now Maria's words seemed to open up a whole new possibility. "What do I do, Maria?" Victor asked, his voice filled with uncertainty. "I don't want to make a fool of myself. I've spent so long building up my confidence, but I'm not sure if I'm ready to put my heart on the line again." Maria placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You've already taken the hardest step, Victor. You've allowed yourself to be vulnerable. You've shown people who you really are, and that's the hardest part. Don't be afraid to take the next step. Life doesn't wait for perfection, Victor. It waits for people who are brave enough to live it." Victor took a deep breath. Maria's words rang true. He had already taken a step toward a new life. He had opened up to the village, shared his story, and shown them that he was more than just his disability. Now he had the chance to do the same for himself, to open his heart, to embrace the possibility of love, and to see if Anya might feel the same way about him. The next afternoon, Victor found himself walking to the small shop where Anya worked. His heart was racing and his palms were sweaty, but he knew this was the moment. He couldn't let fear hold him back anymore. He had to take a chance. As he approached the shop, he saw Anya through the window, arranging some flowers on the counter. Her bright smile greeted him as he stepped inside, and she looked up in surprise. "Victor," she said, her voice soft but warm. "What brings you here today?" Victor took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. "I wanted to talk to you, Anya. I've been thinking about you a lot lately." Anya's eyes widened slightly, and she stepped closer. "What about?" "I wanted to thank you," Victor said, his voice a little shaky but sincere. "You've been kind to me in a way that no one else has been. You've seen something in me that I've only just begun to see in myself. And I wanted to know if maybe we could get to know each other better. If you'd like that too." Anya stood still for a moment, her gaze softening. Then slowly she smiled, her eyes shining with warmth. "I'd like that very much, Victor." In that moment, Victor felt as though everything he had been through, the years of doubt, the pain, the rejection, had led him to this point. He had finally found someone who saw him for who he was, someone who didn't define him by his weaknesses but by his strength of character. From that day on, Victor and Anya spent more time together. They shared stories, laughter, and dreams of the future. Victor had finally allowed himself to open his heart, and in doing so he had found the love he had always longed for. It wasn't the perfect fairy tale romance, but it was real. It was built on respect, kindness, and understanding. And that, Victor realized, was far more meaningful than any dream he had ever had. The village had changed too. They no longer saw Victor as the man with the limp, but as a man who had the courage to be himself. And that, he thought, was all anyone could ever ask for.